Hi, I'm Laura Cox Kaplan. Welcome to She Said podcast. Here on this podcast, we talk about the building blocks and the micro habits that help us create real and lasting influence. What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about the kind of influence that helps you achieve your goals and whatever it is in life that you want to accomplish. But perhaps most importantly, it's the type of influence that helps you create real impact and that enables you to truly thrive. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. This is episode 293. You know, one of the most challenging things that I have found, and this may have been true for you as well, is that it can be very hard to acknowledge when that perfect job, that perfect situation is really not so perfect after all. Or maybe what was once the perfect fit for you, job and career wise, isn't the perfect fit anymore. That was the case with this week's guest, who was the chief marketing officer for Harley Davidson. Just imagine how incredible that job must have been. It's all the more reason why I think Shelley Paxton's story is really going to resonate with you. Shelley has written a terrific book. It's called Soulbatical. That is a word that she termed to describe the process that she went through to pivot from the career she was in into the one that she is doing now, which really lights up her soul, as you will hear in this conversation. A few things I want to call your attention to, though, that we touch on. We talk about identity, specifically the challenges and the opportunities that arise when we reevaluate a career path and really focus on aligning our values. And Shelley says something that I think is so interesting related to the values exercise that she shares, and that is it's not a one and done. And I think that's a super important point. We also talk about values over validation and why that is a really important data point from Shelley's perspective. And then we talk about her journey of self-discovery, how she came up with this term Soulbatical, how that became the title of her book, and so much more. Friend, I think you're going to love this conversation. Not only is Shelley's story inspiring, and I think it will really resonate with you, but also I think her advice and perspective is really, really helpful. I have included in the show notes a link to Shelley's terrific book, which will also be coming out in paperback soon. In the meantime, though, here is episode 293 with the fabulous Shelley Paxton. Enjoy. Shelley, welcome to She Said.
I'm so excited to be here, Laura. Thank you.
Well, I am really excited to have you here. You and I share a real passion for a number of different topics, but one in particular is this idea of the career pivot and identity and a lot of the stuff that gets wrapped up when we think about, landing our dream job and then one day maybe it sneaks up on us and it's not working for us anymore. So before we jump into the meat of this conversation, let's level set. You talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah, what I'm doing now, this is going to be juicy because what led me here is the yummy context that I know we'll get into. What I'm doing now is, I am an author, a speaker. I am a change maker. Really, what I am is an advocate for all of us rewriting our script of success to celebrate more humanity, well being, and soul. And the expression of that looks like teaching and writing and speaking.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. Let's talk about how you landed in this place because you were in a job that most people would probably kill for. You were the chief marketing officer at Harley Davidson. Talk a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, especially Harley Davidson. I always say Harley freaking Davidson. It's the iconic global brand people love so much they tattoo it on their bodies. You're right. It's every marketer's dream to work for a brand or serve or steward. I felt like such an honor and a privilege to steward a brand with that much history and legacy and emotion attached to it. So how I got there is I had a 26-year career in advertising and marketing. I had a really incredible career. And I think it's important to say at the start of this conversation that I have zero regrets. I had an amazing career, a lot of privilege and good fortune, and I worked my butt off. I just realized I worked my butt off toward someone else's success script and someone else's definition of success, and we'll get into that. But what got me
Mhm.
there is I got into advertising right after college. It was my dad was a big advertising and marketing executive, and then he went on to become president of some big brands that we would all know, like Pillsbury and Haagen-Dazs, and some really pretty epic brands. And so advertising and marketing was something familiar. It was his success script. I stumbled into it and I thought, well, this is really sexy and really fun. And I was working on, from the outset, really iconic brands like Wheaties in the days of Michael Jordan and McDonald's, which took me around the world. And so this career was satisfying a lot of things. Like I really wanted to travel. I loved being a part of the story of these brands. And so
Mhm.
ultimately, fast forward, I'd lived all over the place. I'd represented, brands from the ones I just mentioned to AOL during the dot-com boom to Visa and Intel, so across industries. And then post divorce, so I went through a pretty traumatic divorce, which I talk about in my book in 2008, 2009. And so I then went into this kind of rebuilding myself, reclaiming my mojo phase. And then Harley came calling. So imagine you have this pretty epic career already, but I'd always been on the advertising side or the media
Mhm.
side. And then the brand comes calling that, everybody knows in the world and says, hey, why don't you come work with us and help us really build a global marketing organization and do some epic stuff and ride motorcycles around the world. And as I was going, yeah, you know what? Stella wants her groove back. I thought, well, what better way to do that than to hitch my ride to Harley freaking Davidson? And so that was the beginning of the pinnacle of my corporate career and the beginning of this journey that we're about to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing story, and it strikes me too. I'm sure that there was a pretty big difference in you were in a client service type role beforehand before going into a corporate role. Maybe talk a little bit about some of those differences and why there was such an appeal to actually working in house. I mean, granted, it's Harley Davidson, so that would be hard to pass up, but at the same time, it is a different role.
Yeah, I loved being on in the agency side. I worked
Mhm.
for Omnicom and Omnicom Media Group for pretty much my entire career on that side of the house, and felt really honored to be in these global roles with such iconic brands. I honestly didn't even know, other than, titles, that there was something that could be even greater. Like I wasn't looking toward a Harley. I To be honest with you, what I always thought is I'm better suited
Mm.
for this side of the house, meaning being more in that kind of service brand.
Mhm.
Or the service side of the house. I loved being there. And what I was most nervous about, and I think why I hadn't entertained going to the other side of the house, is I thought it would be a little bit more corporate and stodgy and super, super conservative. And I always questioned whether I would fit. And I should probably put fit in air quotes, right? Because I know so much now that I didn't know then. And I know it'll factor into the conversation. So I really. I couldn't imagine myself when I think about the brands. I couldn't imagine myself at McDonald's in the corporate, corporate McDonald's. I couldn't imagine myself at corporate Visa. I couldn't imagine, even though I loved my clients there and I loved serving those brands. And then Harley, when they came calling, I thought, huh, that's actually a brand that I could imagine myself, because while it was Fortune 500, it's a smaller organization. They stand for freedom and
Mhm.
authenticity and values that I now understand align with mine. And I thought, if not now, then when? Because I went to Harley not
Mhm.
only after that pretty traumatic and turbulent divorce, but also when I had just turned 40. So it felt like this, why not now? Right. And I say this question a lot in my work. I say, if not now, then when? And I wasn't asking that question as much then, but I believe it was the beginning of me asking that question. And I'm really glad I did. And I'm really, really glad I said yes.
Yeah. So there's so many amazing things that pop into my head as you're talking about your story and you're talking about the importance of having that the personal values and brand alignment with an organization and how important that is. Even with that though, you hit a point where you realized you weren't where you were supposed to be. And let's fast forward and talk about what that moment was and what happened.
Yeah, so this is exactly how what you said in the intro. You know, we think we have the dream job and then we realize that we might be defining dream job and success on terms that don't necessarily resonate with our truth and our values and our desires. And so that's exactly what happened to me. And I want to be clear, I'm speaking with such clarity and conviction now, 7.5 years after leaving Harley. Just to give a little context around that, I didn't
Mhm.
really have language for any of this. So, anybody who's listening right now and just sort of feeling like you're just in the muck of it all, it's okay. And you're not alone. And I hope that some of the language that I now understand and some pieces of my story will serve you powerfully. But it's
Mhm.
okay to not have the clarity around all of this. I definitely didn't. So, to answer your question, Laura, I get to this place. I learn how to ride a motorcycle. I'm reclaiming all of my badassery and becoming, the best version of Shelley Paxton and serving this brand. And again, don't regret a single second of it. Best decision I ever made, and such incredible experience having my little tiny fingerprints on this legacy brand. And at the same time, I got a wake up call. So I believe that when we have those little soul whispers that then sometimes become shouts, and if we still don't listen, they like whack us with the 2x4. I was having that and I wasn't listening and I was kind of pushing through and I was doing everything I, was taught. It's like, well, suck it up, buttercup. Like, keep pushing through, keep going. And then a nightmare, a recurring nightmare started happening. So I was at Harley for 6.5 years. And the final year of my time at Harley, I was waking up with this question first and foremost. Like, during the day, it was, is this all there is? And then I would feel really guilty and really privileged for even asking this ridiculous question, or what I thought at the time was this ridiculous question. And I thought, how could I get to this point? Everything I was taught said success looked like ticking the boxes of, big titles and big paychecks and iconic brands and world travel and, all the things that I was doing, all the things I had done. And then I get to the peak of the proverbial mountaintop and I ultimately become CMO of Harley. And there I am. And I felt exhausted and burned out. And I think even scarier for me, I felt really empty inside, like
Mm.
this lack of fulfillment. And I guess I kind of stepped back and I was like, wow, I thought if you did all the things and ticked all the boxes, joy and fulfillment would be served on a silver platter. And I could not have been more wrong.
Mm.
And at the time, no one was talking about this. So I think because I wasn't listening, I was asking the question, but I wasn't really sitting with it. The universe and my soul conspired to wake me up every single night. And I had a recurring nightmare that started to prevent me from sleeping. I started drinking myself to sleep, trying to incapacitate this nightmare. But what I finally, months later, started to understand is what I was seeing in this nightmare. And it's where the book begins.
Mhm.
So if you
Mhm.
want me to go into the nightmare, I'm happy to. Um, but I realized that I was like my soul was dying. I
Yeah.
wasn't living my truth. And that's what this nightmare was trying to wake me up to and say, no more. You can't live like this. And what will this look like when you're 50? And at the time when the nightmare started, I was 45. When I left Harley, I was 46.
Oh, wow.
So not a spring chicken. I mean, I look at it now and I'm like, age is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But I think it's also really scary in midlife to go, will I become irrelevant? Should I choose to take a pause? Should I choose to try to do something different? So I guess I'll pause at the nightmare and you can tell me where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there that I want to unpack. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're talking, because I'm sort of drawing on my own experience, is whether you feel like you were in the role for a period of time because it was where you were supposed to be and then it wasn't, or was it a role that you were never meant to be in? And I think this is the part that I think about and struggle with. And I think, everybody's story is their own unique experience. I think for me, all the roles that I had served me until they didn't. Sort of that natural evolution of growing beyond it. But it does oftentimes in these big corporate roles come with a lot of bells and whistles that are attached to identity and what you think you should do, or what the expectations are that others, the organization, or the people around you may have. So I realize
Yes.
that's not really a question. It's more just sort of laying out some some sort of thematics as I was sort of listening to your story. I'd love for you to kind of weigh in on, what you think about your experience. Were you where you were supposed to be until you weren't, or kind of how do you think about that?
Yeah, I do, and that's why I say I have no regrets, and I use very similar language to what you just said. Like it served me. That I talk in terms of that success script. It
Hmm.
became really clear to me as I explored what was happening and this nightmare that was waking me up to the truth of my soul and this journey that I went on called my Soulbatical, which I know we'll talk about.
Yeah.
I what my dad's success script served me so powerfully until it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have no regrets and I know is exactly where I was meant to be. I had to get to this place where I was serving such an iconic brand at such a senior level, thinking I had done all the things only to realize and be woken up to my own truth and have it be so profound that I couldn't not listen
Mm.
and that I had to recognize, you said the word should, and so much of what I talk about is that we get shackled to, I call it the shackles of should. We get shackled to these ideas of what we should be doing,
Right.
right? That serves someone else's script, whether it's your parents' script or a societal script or a cultural script, whatever, a community script, whatever it is for you. We're conditioned in this way and in ways that we don't really even see it until we're woken up to it. And so I think I had to get to that point before I could see any of this clearly and start to set out on my own journey and do my own inner exploration, which then led me to the work that I do today. But I want to be clear, none of this happened overnight. So yes, served me really powerfully, just like you said, Laura, in your career. And then I had to go. I always say every badass accomplishment is a series of tiny steps. I had to take the tiny steps that require a ton of courage each step of the way in order to evaluate my identity and
Hmm.
everything it was tethered to, which looked like my corporate career, right? And really interrogate my values
Hmm.
and understand what are my values and am I living in service of those, and on and on. So
Yeah.
we can, dive into some of those, but yeah, I know for sure I was exactly where I was meant to be and that was going to be my wake up.
Yeah, I appreciate all that. I think that's so helpful for people to think about that. This idea that you evolve and you grow and you find these moments. Sometimes you see them coming, sometimes they surprise you, right? But that it's such a natural evolution of being a human to move on to these other things. So I'd love for you, Shelley, to dig into what you did. Okay, you get this wake up call, you realize you have to do something. You took what you now refer to as a soul batical. But I'd love for you to talk about the process that you went through and how you ultimately came to really clarity on what was going to be next.
Yeah, it was, again, I can speak with such conviction about it now, but I want to say I felt very alone.
Mhm.
I felt terrified. I felt very conflicted and confused by everything that I was seeing in this nightmare. Like my soul, I was actually seeing my dead dog in a closet, alone, malnourished, and dying. And I later, because I asked for help and I went to a doctor and I started slowing down and I learned meditation, I later learned, like, oh my God, my dog was a proxy for my soul.
Mhm.
And it brought me to my knees. And I thought, I that's when I started kind of looking at 50 going, wow, do I want to feel sort of like a shell of a human being who's still drinking herself to sleep and, I becoming a functional alcoholic and all of these things? Or do I want to start to explore what's inside? And so as I dug into that a little bit and I slowed down long enough to listen and understand the message, and I realized I needed to take a break because I didn't know how to do this with the community I had in the context of the work that I was doing. I didn't really have any at the time mentors and role models who were doing this sort of thing. And so I said, you know what, I need a break. And then I sort of, even in my own family, became the quote unquote crazy person who left Harley Davidson. Like, I remember my dad saying very clearly to me, like, no, you don't do this. Nobody does this.
Mhm.
And I had this kind of Greek chorus of doubters and lack of support. And so I think this is also an important point because you will get to these crossroads. Anybody who's listening to this and feeling anything remotely similar, you will get to these crossroads and you have to listen deeply and tune into yourself and your own intuition to know which way to go, because you are going to kick up all of the opinions and all of the judgment and all of the insecurities
Mhm.
of everyone around you. And it's basically down to you, and it's going to require a lot of courage.
Mhm.
These are bold moves. And so as I was approaching, I finally said, I'm going to leave Harley. Gave myself a runway so that I had some time to make sure financially I had a little cushion. So I
Mhm.
worked with my financial advisor and I wanted to make sure that Harley was also in a good place. So before I even told Harley, we were already in the process of doing reorganization. So what they didn't know at the time is as I was helping navigate through the reorganization, I was looking to the future of the marketing organization and who my successors were going to be and how this brand and my team, all of my people, were going to be in the best place possible for success.
Yeah.
So I wanted all of that as part of the runway, because what I said to Harley when I ultimately left is I said, this isn't actually about Harley, right? I love Harley, but we can't be together anymore. It felt like a second divorce. I said, what
Mm.
I'm doing is I'm choosing myself. I want to go and learn who is Shelley Paxton, and I want to reconnect with my soul. And I had no language to explain to anybody what this thing was because, again, I didn't have any role models. There weren't others who were doing this at the time. It wasn't as common a conversation as it is now. And in my opinion, it's still not a common enough conversation.
Mhm.
So I love that we're sort of normalizing this dialogue. So I called it my soulbatical. I woke up one morning. I love language. I'm a creative spirit from all the time I spent in advertising and marketing. And I was like, oh, that's it. I'm going on my soulbatical because I knew it wasn't a traditional
Right.
sabbatical. And it wasn't a vacation. It wasn't simply a break, because I knew what I was being called to do was a deep exploration of myself
Mhm.
and my identity, and to reconnect with my soul. So I called it my Soulbatical. I christened myself Chief Soul Officer because at the time, titles were very important to me.
Uh-huh.
And I knew if I had a title that said Chief Soul Officer, my primary responsibility and obligation was to my soul, and to listen deeply and to understand my truth and my values and my desires, and then take those baby steps forward from there.
There's so much of that that I absolutely love, especially the impact that your language has on your mindset and on your perspective, which is really what you're getting to. And I think that's such a powerful thing, regardless of the person who's listening, who may have a very different point of view, but remembering that the language that you use, the way you talk to yourself, the way you think about and edit or characterize your story and who you are and what you do makes such a big difference in terms of how you think about that and how you present yourself to yourself as well as to the world. So that's a really beautiful thing. Shelley, I'd love for you to get a little more tactical with my listener, with me and my listener here, and talk a bit about what those first steps were, because you were still in this period of, you knew you needed to take a break. You needed this soulbatical, as you refer to it. But what did you do, and how did you structure that time away?
Yeah, and again, I was sort of inventing this every day. And so what I would say to anyone is, don't put a ton of pressure on yourself to have this fully structured, because the value in any pause, and I think it's important at this point to say, I kind of redefined Soulbatical as I went on this journey. So I want to say what I thought it was when I left Harley was this idea that you leave your job. What I realized is that Soulbatical is actually about finding yourself. What I realize now, 7+ years later, and I've actually redefined Soulbatical. You'll see in a lot of the work that I put out into the world, I actually define much of the language I created. And I love the point that you made, Laura. You don't have to invent words, but if that feels right to you, by all means, please go do it. That's what I do.
Mhm.
I find new ways of expression to characterize and give me something to sort of hold on to. But words are wands, and we get to create our reality. And that's why I say, let go of these shoulds, like release the shackles of should in favor of what I get to do, I want to do, and put the language to that. Sabbatical, I think it's important to read this definition of what it means, and then I can talk more specifically about some of the things I did, and frankly, some of the things that you can start doing today. So the definition I ultimately wrote for Soulbatical that stands true today is that it is a way of being in full alignment with one's soul. It's basically a conscious choice
Mhm.
to live and lead with greater authenticity, courage, and fulfillment.
So it doesn't necessarily mean leaving the job that you have, which I think is a really important point. Not everybody is in a position to take any kind of sabbatical or soulbatical, if you will. And so I want to underscore that point because I think that's really important.
Thank you for that underscore, like underscore, underscore, underscore highlight, right? I think it's so important. And that's why I wanted to weave it into the conversation, because I think it's so important to note that that is one of the big epiphanies that I had on the way is, oh, okay, that was my journey. Because what I didn't realize is I was being called to do this work and to become this sort of Pied Piper for rewriting your script of success, and to share and pay forward the insights and the ideas and the learnings and the tools that I was using. But you don't have to take 6 weeks or 3 months or 6 months or a year away from your work. You can start this right now, and you can make choices every single day like I do. And some days better than other. We're
Mhm.
human, and that's okay too. You can make choices to say, I am going to live with greater authenticity and courage and fulfillment, whatever that means for me, and recognize that those are choices we make every day. So, to get really
Mhm.
practical, one of those choices, first an exploration that I now frame as a choice, because I realize that no matter where we are in each chapter of our life, and especially in transitions when we're kind of feeling like something's not right, those challenges that we're feeling, they
Mhm.
present choices. And the choices that we make are what drive change. So I think challenges, choices, change. And so I just did a talk on Saturday where I talked about 5 of the choices, and I'll at least do 2 of these because I can give very practical what you can do right now examples. So one of the choices, and this is where I started, is we choose values over validation. I think one of the 2 by 4s I got hit with is that I realized I was living my entire life w being served by the validation of others, right? Am I on the right path? Am I good at what I do? All of the accolades and the promotions and the titles, everything was outside of me. The script I was living was outside of me. That was the validation. And when I turned that to understand my values and do the work, so I very easily now can say my top 3 values are freedom, authenticity, and courage. And I can look backwards and say, oh, Harley was pretty closely mapped to freedom and
Mhm.
authenticity. Yeah, on some levels. But I did not have this clarity when I was at Harley. Probably makes sense why I ended up at that brand and why it did serve me very well for a period of time. But when I really dug into my values, I think it's twofold. It's my value and understanding who I am as Shelley Paxton, not as the brands I serve. And I asked this question. I said, what if Shelley Paxton is the most iconic brand I could ever serve? And you could be listening to this and go, yeah, but I'm not in advertising or marketing. It doesn't matter. What if you, who you are, is the most iconic brand you could ever serve? What if your values drive every choice that you make going forward? How you show up in the world, the brands you serve, the work you do, the people you surround yourself with, the relationships you're in. You get the idea. So I think starting from that place of really believing in who I am
Mhm.
without all that other stuff outside of me, believing in your inherent self worth and value, and then getting really clear on what your top 3 values are. And Laura, I'll send you my favorite sheet to use is Brene Brown's Dare to Lead values. I use that all the time. So it's a free download on her website. And so I encourage anyone listening, go to that and start with pick your favorite number, your top 15, and then give yourself some space to narrow it to 10 and then to 5. And then the really challenging but ultimately game changing work is to get to your top 3. And then you can start to look at your life in a very different way. Those become the filters and the criteria for how you show up and for the decisions you make in all those aspects. And to be honest, it also starts to inform the boundaries that you create in your life. So the other thing I say is we choose boundaries over burnout. And boundaries, I
Mm.
don't think I really understood boundaries before I left Harley. And now that I've done this work, I understand boundaries to very simply be what's okay and what's not okay in service of my values and my well being. And that's changed everything for me. So values and boundaries are totally integrated. They're deeply, deeply relational to each other.
So I would love for you to take just a moment because I've been through these values exercises, several different times, and I try to revisit my values to make sure that the lists that I've made of what they are remains true to who I am. Because as I said before, I do think we evolve and we grow, and that sometimes those things can, need to be tweaked a bit. So maybe talk a little bit, Shelley, about, at least in my experience, a values exercise is never a one and done. Like sitting down, writing down your values in an hour, done, is probably not realistic for most people. Certainly not for me. I don't know if that was the case for you, but maybe talk about the
Oh, for
process that
sure.
you went through to refine and figure out what those values were, and kind of what to help people set their own expectations for doing that work.
Yeah, I think it's important to say a few things are coming up as you're saying that. I mean, one, I also believe in choosing pause over
Mm,
push. And when I say that, and I'm saying this for a reason to tie to the answer I'm about to give to your question. So when I say pause, I'm literally talking, it could be 10 minutes in the morning. I'm talking, let's take a beat. Let's take a breath. We still live in a culture that celebrates the hustle and the grind and busyness as a badge of honor. And the only way that we can begin to do justice to the kind of work and exploration that we're talking about, getting clear on your values and getting clear on your boundaries. And I'll talk about permission, because that's another one of my favorites, is to give ourselves a beat. And you don't have to, again, you don't have to take a week off or 3 weeks off or 6 months or a year. What about giving yourself a little time every day, or 3 days a week, or a long weekend every quarter, or whatever this looks like for you? But give yourself permission to pause, because that's the only way we can sink into it. And then, Laura, to your point, yeah, does it have to be a one and done? I'm going to sit down and wrestle with this thing for 3 hours. No, because that's not realistic. And I'm nothing if not realistic and very practical in how we approach this work. But I do believe that when we say, oh, I don't have time, we're making different choices.
absolutely.
So really interrogate your likely. This is another exercise that I love that goes hand in hand with everything we're talking about. So two things that I would recommend doing at least a couple times a year: your values, and really checking in on your values. And another exercise that I call soul fuels versus soul sucks. And I actually try to do this one once a quarter. I would do this one more frequently than the values exercise. And what you do is essentially, this to me is a way to call out, where are the energy sucks in my
Mm,
life? The soul sucks. Where are the shoulds popping up where maybe I'm not seeing them clearly? And so this is essentially an audit. And you can do this very simply. Take either a clean page in your journal, or grab a sheet of paper from your printer, draw a line down the middle so you have two columns. Entitle the left column Soul Fuels, the right column Soul Sucks. And what I mean by those two things, I think it's pretty explanatory, but soul fuels are those people, places, things, activities, emotions, feelings that light you up, that put you in flow, that bring you energy where you lose time doing it. And the soul sucks are the exact opposite. They're kind of the vampires,
mhm,
right? Or
mhm.
the energy
Right, right.
vampires in our lives. And right? So they're the things that are draining us. And they're often the things we're doing from a place of guilt and obligation and people pleasing. They are usually the shoulds in
Mm,
disguise. And it's a great, so here's what I would invite you to do: set a timer on your phone and do 3 minutes, just 3 minute stream of consciousness on each column. Don't pick up your pen or pencil, just go. Like, what are the things that are bringing me energy and joy? And that's all your soul fuels. Do the same thing on your soul sucks. And then step back and look at your lists and just take them in for a good minute at least. And then you can ask yourself, like, what surprises me?
mm,
What inspires me? What scares me? What do I want more
mm,
of? What do I want less of in my life? And there's a whole series of things because I believe that this starts to show us a picture. And this is why I like this one quarterly. It's sort of a quarterly picture of where am I choosing to spend my energy, my very precious energy? And where are the shoulds taking over my life? And where am I maybe not in alignment with my values? So it's a really practical but powerful audit that we can all be doing.
Yeah, I love that. You also have a fun little trick that you use where you use your orange is your favorite color. It's the color of the cover of
Yes.
your book, but you give yourself permission slips. Yeah, which I love.
Yes. So this is we choose for I say we choose permission over pleasing. So again, challenges present choices and choices drive change. And so I think having awareness and consciousness around the choices we're making and reminding ourselves every single day, we get to give ourselves permission. I know if you're like anything like me, I defaulted to pleasing. Even as a rebel, I was pleasing so many people around me, especially in my corporate career, because I didn't have that inherent self worth. My entire identity was tethered to my corporate career and pleasing my bosses and those brands and being in service of to a
Mm,
default. And so now I remind myself pick your favorite color, buy some post it notes. This is the cheapest solution and ask yourself this question every morning. What do I need to allow myself to do, not do, and or feel in order to show up as my most bold, my most bold, brave, and badass self
yeah.
today? Or in this moment, maybe you have a big meeting or presentation or event or something coming up that day, or a crucial conversation. Write yourself post-it notes. Sometimes have so many of these. They're on my bathroom mirror and my refrigerator and all over my computer. And I celebrate that. So get comfortable writing yourself notes because I think if nothing else, you're reminding yourself and empowering yourself to say, I have choice and I give myself permission. And sometimes I give myself permission to say, I am going to take an hour away from my computer in the afternoon and go outside and walk the trail because I also know that this is just sitting behind a computer screen for hours on end is a total soul suck for me.
Yeah.
So, how do we get clear on those things and then create in service of them?
Yeah. Shelley, thank you so much. What an incredibly inspiring and thoughtful conversation. I loved it. Again, the book is called Soulbatical. You will find a link where you can purchase Shelley's book in the show notes for this episode. Shelley, thank you so much.
Thank you. And the paperback's coming out and a workbook is coming out after that. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. Hey, friend, how much did you love those amazing questions that Shelley posed toward the end of this conversation? As I was listening to her, I was thinking about, gosh, these are great journal prompts to use. I'm curious how you think about these values exercises, if you've done them, if you do them with regularity, sort of what changes you've seen over time. I know for me personally, I mean, one of the biggest changes related to my values exercises has been when other people enter my life, as I became a mom and had kids, and it really shifted the things that were most important to me. And so I'm curious to hear from you, if you've done these exercises, what has changed and what has stayed consistent? I'd really, really love to hear. Again, this was episode 293 with Shelley Paxton. You will find additional information and the links to Shelley's books, along with some other things in the show notes for this episode. Friend, thanks so much for being here today. I am really always honored to have you. And most of all, I'm grateful that you're taking this time to invest in you. Until next week, you take care, and I'll talk to you again real soon. And remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media.